Well, hey friends, thanks for joining us today on Tears to Wells. I'm so glad that you can join us today for this podcast. Now, I know it's been a couple of weeks since I was able to post anything, and that was intentional. Wanted to spend a little extra time with family and resting and spend some time with my son. But we're back at it today, and sometimes between Thanksgiving and Christmas and even on into the new year, a lot of folks suffer with depression, and this kind of a season brings the blues and the melancholy and can be quite difficult for so many reasons. And sometimes it brings up emotions that we don't want to deal with. But today I'm excited because I have a good friend of mine, a friend by the name of Mark Tossell. He's going to be joining us today. And I've known Mark for almost 30 years. And Mark is going to give a raw and transparent account of his journey. Mark was in ministry for many, many years. And in the height of his ministry and in the midst of his ministry, he was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And Mark talks about that journey in a very unique way and offers us a perspective and even hope for those who have the same struggle. So I'm excited today as Mark opens his heart and shares with us his journey. And of course, I'll come back afterwards to explain to you how you can learn more about Mark's journey. And here with us now is Mark Tossell from Sydney, Australia. Well, thanks for joining me this week on Tears to Wells. I've been looking forward to today for a long time. I get to interview and be with a good friend of mine of many years by the name of Mark Tossell. And Mark Tossell is joining me today all the way from Sydney, Australia. I never thought we'd be able to do this, Mark, but welcome in. And it's good to have you on the podcast today, Mark.
Yeah, great to be here today, Danny.
That's funny. Who would have thought, because I've known Mark now. I was trying to do the math in my head. I think, did you come to school in 1987?
92.
92.
Yeah, 92.
Okay, I was thinking in my mind 87 for some reason.
Yeah, I was 23.
Okay,
so
92.
It's almost, what is that?
28 years.
Almost 30 years, my goodness.
30 years, yeah. Time flies. And so I got to know Mark in college, and so we've kept acquaintance over the years. And Mark has a very interesting story, and I think he fits right in with what we're trying to do on the podcast. As you know, the podcast is Tears to Wells, and what we're trying to do is help people get from maybe a low place in their life to back to a place of productivity, back to a place where they can help others and obviously help themselves. So Mark, it's good to have you here this morning. You've already said hello and everything, but let's just jump right in. I know that as we were talking briefly earlier, you mentioned you've told your story several times, but just kind of walk our audience through what your story looks like and just kind of how you got to where you're at right now.
Yeah. So look, thanks for having me on the show, Danny. We've been friends for a long time, and I've actually been inspired by your journey and what you've gone through late with your son and the way you've responded to that. And so just wanted you to encourage you that you're making a difference even through your story as well as the podcast.
Thank you, Mark.
So
thank you
for having me. Look, my story is it's quite interesting and convoluted. So I've always had I suppose a little bit of a different personality. So and in studying this later in my life, I've realized that this kind of personality is prone to what they used to call melancholy. So I'm very introspective. I think a lot. I pretty much never stop thinking unless I'm asleep. And I put incredibly high pressure on myself. I always set extremely high standards for myself. So even growing up in school, I used to love mathematics, right? So if I got a 95, I should have got 100. Just really, really tough on myself. And in some way, I believe that I may have some hereditary predisposition to a form of depression, just looking back through the family tree, perhaps. But anyway, I started struggling with depression and anxiety in my late teens. So it started really young. It's been my whole adult life. But it was manageable. It was manageable. And so I got involved in church in my senior year of high school. And went off to university, studied mechanical engineering, worked as an engineer for 2 years, but then a big change in my life was heading off to America, where I met you, and going
I'm
to
sure that was
Bible
a big
college.
change, a big
Yeah, mate, you
culture
talk about a
shock and
big
all the different.
change.
I know.
Yeah, well, I went from earning lots of money, living in a lovely home with my parents, and Australia, Sydney, the weather's amazing, and it was January when I left here, and it was like 95 degrees, middle of the summer. I arrived in Chicago, no joke, it was 20 Fahrenheit. There was a blizzard. I'm living in the dormitories. I couldn't work in America, if you remember.
Sure.
So I was completely broke. Never had money. It was really tough. So went through Bible college, met my lovely wife, Christina, and was married in the States. Came back to Australia in 1999. We founded a church in a very beautiful part of Sydney, a fairly affluent area, but it's extremely tough starting that church. And I'm very passionate about what I do in pretty much any arena. I throw myself into it with, reckless abandon, as they say. And so working extremely long hours, very little time off, very few holidays, and like many ministers and pastors. It's incredibly demanding, particularly emotionally, and also you put a lot of pressure on yourself. And so that over time began to exacerbate my mental demons. So I would say it was probably around, I actually had to sit down and look at the kind of the timing. So I would say things started getting pretty bad around 2005. And I started looking for help. So I began reading books about depression. But I was extremely careful to avoid what I would have called secular authors. So I had been warned about psychiatry, psychology, psychotropic drugs, or mental health medication. So I completely steered away from that, steered away from seeing a doctor, and focused on very heavily theologically based writings about depression, many of which were very helpful, particularly Charles Spurgeon, by the way.
Interesting.
And then, Spurgeon struggled.
I knew he struggled with depression,
severely.
but I had no idea that he'd actually written on it, and that's
It actually came up in many of his writings. Maybe as a follow-up to the podcast, I can send the link and you can share it with your audience. Also, there's a few authors that I could perhaps recommend. I'd have to sit down and make a list, but and then I was getting help from a couple of pastors. One in particular, a wonderful man, Doug Fisher in San Diego, California, who had struggled severely with depression, has done his whole adult life. Like me, very introspective, bit of a deep thinker, very hard on himself, and he'd been very seriously suicidal. And I went to a conference in 2005, and I'll never forget. I was sitting there just so dark and so hopeless, and just I was out of energy of fighting this. Wasn't sleeping, wasn't suicidal at that point, although I was later, and just ready to just give up on everything. I just couldn't handle it anymore. And the thought in my head is very common for people with different forms of mental wellness struggles, and that was no one will understand. Mm-hmm. No one understands. So I can't. Who do I talk to? And to be honest with you, Danny, I thought I'm losing my mind. I'm going crazy, and I was fearful of even being put in, like a mental health ward in a hospital. Mm-hmm. And I was at a conference, and Doug Fisher spoke, and he talked about his journey, and he talked about being suicidal, and his wife knew. He called it checking out. He was thinking about checking out, and his wife said to him one day, she said, "Doug, don't do anything that we will regret for the rest of our lives." And that's a very powerful thought, because his suffering would end, but the suffering of others would be multiplied. And he realized then that he needed to get help, and to people often, unfortunately, those who don't struggle with serious mental health issues. They can often be dismissive, and unfortunately they can say things like snap out of it.
Right.
The worst thing, and I say this very respectfully and carefully, is when Christians say, well, you just need more faith.
Right.
You just need to pray and read your Bible. Or even people saying, are you right with God? Is there sin in your life? You know, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And look, they meant well.
Right.
But, you know, unfortunately, the brain is a biological organ, and we are spirit, soul, and body. And they were focusing on one of those three only and ignoring the other two aspects of human nature. And the consequence of that, Danny, was that I was already depressed. But when well-meaning people that I respected said those things, now I'm beating myself up. I'm a terrible Christian.
Right.
So it just gets worse and worse
Oh,
and worse
right,
and worse
right,
and worse.
right. And it's
this vicious
cycle. It's a cycle, and it doubles down. And yes, sir. Right. Right.
So got to the point where you asked if there was a turning point. So things were getting steadily worse. I'd started becoming, I had two ways of escape. One was suicide, and unfortunately I had that all planned out, but I don't know that I was ready to take my own life. I did have and I won't say what it was, but I had a very specific way of how I was going to do it. I don't know if you know this, but women attempt suicide a lot more than men, but men succeed in suicide because they actually plan it, and they have a way of doing it, and they succeed in it. So it's quite sad.
Well, I think just the fact that you were thinking about it, that's always the first path to it all starts with thoughts, you know, and they okay.
And I had this feeling that's very common with people going through this, was I'm trapped. How do I get out? And I would say added in the mix was a bit of a midlife crisis. Everybody jokes about midlife crisis, but there's nothing funny about it. It's very well documented.
Yes.
They say midlife is when your regrets of the past meet the fears of the future. And that I was going through that as well. Financially, I'd made some poor decisions, and also, you know, I'd given up a really good career for ministry, and I'm not saying that was a wrong decision, but financially it was horrible. I went through a period of 6 months in early 2015 where everything fell apart. So I'd actually been thinking about moving back to England, where I was born. I grew up in Australia, but I was born in England, still had citizenship in England. I thought, and this is awful, but I thought I'll just leave everything, church, family, friends. I thought I'll secretly go get and I was actually saving up money to do this. That's how close.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, what people don't understand, to a person who's suffering, these are perfectly rational thoughts to them. It's not like it's crazy. It's perfectly rational.
It was almost like I really didn't have an option. I thought I thought I have two options. I either take my own life, but I thought that it caused so much pain to everybody else. At least I had that much awareness. But I thought if I disappear to England, and I could start a new life, and I can just, all these things are causing me pain and grief. But of course, it's not true that obviously that would have fixed anything, because the issues were both health and poor self-care practices, which we'll talk about. So those would have gone with me, right? Even if I'd have moved back. But you know, it's interesting. You get in this place where you get very, very, very dark and very desperate. In a 6-month period, 4 things happened that pushed me over the edge, and that were Christina, my wife, got a very rare form of cancer. It was initially diagnosed as being almost a death sentence. Thankfully, that wasn't the case, but at that time, that's what we thought. We were told that by the doctor, by the specialist. Around that same time, we went through a crippling financial reversal that devastated us financially, that was completely out of our control. That actually affected us for about 10 years, I might add. Then I lost my voice, which I look back and believe it was stress related, but I actually completely lost my voice. So as a minister, I would preach, teach, counsel, visit, and in my case also did a lot of singing. So to not be able to do that was crippling emotionally, mentally. And then our son Adam was diagnosed with Asperger's, high functioning autism, and there are a lot of struggles related to that that I did not handle well. Those four things took place over about a 6-month period, and completely lost it. So, give me an example. My cognitive abilities just went through the floor. I used to prepare 4, 5, 6 sermons a week. I've always loved to study. It's just who I am. I love learning. I love studying. I love thinking, preparing, reading. It got to the point where it would take me 2 weeks to prepare one sermon. I would sit at my laptop for hours and just think I have nothing. I couldn't think. I would literally walk into a McDonald's and look at the menu and think, what do I order? Just couldn't think, and couldn't sleep. So I'd wake up, very common to go to sleep and then wake up, very dark thoughts, started having kind of mild panic attacks. And then, I was very, very desperate. I remember so I was doing a bit of cycling, and I remember riding down the side of, I don't think you can do this in America, but in Australia, you can actually ride down the shoulder of freeways. It's kind of crazy, but that's what I was doing. And yeah, imagine riding down the Dan Ryan on a bicycle, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I'm riding down this freeway, and I remember there was an on-ramp, and I was coming up to the on-ramp on the freeway, and merging onto the freeway was this massive semi truck. And I remember looking at it thinking, just pull in front. Because I knew if I committed suicide, my wife wouldn't get the insurance. But I thought, if this looks like an accident, then it'll all be good. I'll be gone. I'll be free of these mental demons and my family. And you have these thoughts that you really, not everyone, but a lot of people have these thoughts at this point where they say they'd be better off without me. I'm a lousy husband. I'm a lousy dad. I'm a lousy pastor. I'm a horrible person. I'm a failure. I'm useless. I'm stupid. I would literally swear at myself in my own head. You blankety blank. It's just terrible.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at that point, I thought I've got to get some kind of help here. I was getting some help, but not. I had refused to that point to get medical help. And I'll explain why in a second. I think because it will resonate with some of your listeners. But at that point, we had a guy at church, one of our church members, lovely guy, who'd struggled all his adult life. He'd gone through very severe trauma in his teen years, very severe, and a close family member committed suicide. And so he'd struggled his whole life, and he was seeing a doctor who was really helping him. And I thought, I've always resisted getting medical help. And I thought, I remember what happened. My wife said to me one day, she said, Mark, I've tried to hold you up emotionally all these years, and I just don't know how much longer I can do this. And I remember looking at her thinking, for her sake, you need to swallow your pride, get over these other obstacles and get help. So I went to see a Christian doctor. And the amazing thing is that I sat there and I just told him everything. The deep, dark, crazy thoughts in my head, the ruminations. I was there for like an hour. Lovely man who I still see to this day. And he said, I'm really worried about you. He said, we're gonna get you some help. And I left his doctor's office, and it's actually an interesting psychological phenomenon. What happened? It has to do with the release of built up emotional and mental pressure. But when I left, I had my first ever full-on panic attack. So as soon as I walked out the doctor's office, I remember exactly where I was, Malabar in Sydney. And all of a sudden, I literally didn't know where I was. I thought, what day is it? And I started shaking, just waves of fear. And so I felt sick and faint. So I remember going up to a cafe and sitting down, ordering some food, thinking maybe the food will help. It was awful, terrifying. I ended up having I've had probably 3 full-on panic attacks, and my heart goes out to anyone who has real panic attacks. They're just devastating. And that was probably the worst point. But that was kind of the valley that then started the upward climb. So that's when I started getting a lot of help. You asked about and interrupt anytime. You asked about the obstacles.
I'm just so much of this. And what's killing me is so much of this I'm hearing for the first time, from your lips, and it's absolutely killing me because, um, just to know that you went through that much pain, and there's other people going through that, and that's why I want to do this program is, I want, I want people that are maybe where Mark was 10 years ago. I want them
Mm,
to know, hey, you're not alone. There's other people, you know. So one of the things that I guess where we're at now is, looks like you're at a point where you're finally seeking some help. You're,
mhm.
for lack of a better term, you're coming out of it. What were some of the biggest helps to you that really just started you on a good course, other than seeing the doctor and starting to get professional help, someone to kind of guide you through this? Because
Mm,
oftentimes that's what this is it takes people that can guide us through this, that if they do
yeah.
this all the time, they know exactly, what's wrong there. So what were some of the things that kind of helped you get back?
Well, look, I think you've mentioned it again. I think in my case, having someone to guide me through it, there were two people. One was my doctor, who's now a dear friend, and the other one was a pastor friend in another state, Nathan Lloyd, who was just a godsend. It's interesting that both, obviously, the pastor, but also my doctor are Christians, because unfortunately, Danny, in many Christian circles, I can't speak for every Christian circle, but in society in general, there is a stigma, less so in our Western cultures, actually more so in some Asian cultures, I found out. But even in our Western cultures, there is a stigma about just being open and honest, talking about your feelings as a man, talking about those struggles, admitting that you're struggling, that you're not doing well. There's a saying here, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
I think too, Mark, some of this, especially men are so strong. They, even if it passes through their mind, I think I'm depressed.
hmm
I think the first reaction is, no, I'm not me.
hmm
This
hmm
doesn't happen to me. I'm strong. This is something else, and then you add on top of that the Christian aspect of, yeah, but I love God, and I'm
hmm
faithful to my spiritual disciplines, and how could this be happening to
hmm
me? And one of the things I think that I've learned through the years, is this happens to quite a bit of people, but you have some that you have some stress-induced depression. That's where we go through
hmm
seasons
hmm
of stress, and then you have trauma induced. And so you have a lot of people that have traumatic upbringings. And then when they're finally able to process it, when they become adults, they
hmm
live in perpetual depressions. And then I think one I've never really touched on until you mentioned it today is the hereditary aspect. You
hmm
brought it up that sometimes it's in our DNA. It's the gifts our ancestors give us, And I think I have a little bit of that in my background. I think some of the depression I've struggled with in my life has been more because of trauma, and I was able to process that um, later in life,
Yeah.
and understand, like, okay, that what I went through, affected me. And then you had on top of that different layers of other forms of abuse, but it's very interesting. So you're talking with the doctor, and then any other things that kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I'm very blessed, and I just looking back, I'm very thankful. Um, just had amazing support. I think that is absolutely critical. So there was the professional help, and I'll get to a little bit around medication and things, but key to everything, I think, was the fact that I had support. So obviously I had my wife, my family, so like my parents, my sister, um, friends, people at church. So I had a great relationship with our people. Um, I was dear friends, close friends with many of our people. And I think you can do that. I mean, I've heard it said you're not supposed to. Okay, maybe that's for that person who said that, but we had a great great relationship, never
Yeah.
really compromised
Yeah.
the pastor-member relationship. And I had a guy in our
Well, I
church
think
that
even more
started.
pastors are coming full circle. I think you might even been ahead of the curve. I think more pastors are becoming aware of, when I create that distance, I'm putting myself at a different level. I need
Yeah,
people. I need
people
friends.
can't
You know what I mean?
identify with you as
Yeah.
well.
Well, I mean, you need friends. I mean,
Yeah.
you need people to
Yep.
share with what
Yeah.
you're going through. And I think pastors now are kind of coming full circle to realize I need that community just like everybody else does. You know, and that's one of the things I love
Absolutely.
about our church here, where I'm going. I love our pastor. I don't know how many times I've been in some type of a Sunday school or a small group. He's sitting in there just like everybody else is, and he's
Mm.
taking in. And I think you know, they help that. One of the things I
Well,
did
sorry
want to,
if I,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, I
Yeah.
was just going to say, as a part of that support, sorry, just before I forget, um, I had saved up, as you can imagine, a tremendous amount of leave because I just wasn't using it. So the doctor and my pastor friend, Nathan Lloyd, said, you need to take an extended break. And so I took 3 months off, believe it or not. And the church got guests in during that time. They continue to pay our salary during that time, which is amazing. And I changed my email address. I actually changed my cell phone number. So and the church was instructed not to visit. It was very, very, very difficult to do because you're so close, but I had to completely switch off. And I then, through that period, was getting amazing counseling from a psychologist or counselor. Excuse me. He was fantastic, incredibly helpful. I began something which I've tried to continue from then, and that is physical exercise. There's a lot of research being conducted that physical exercise, in many cases, is as effective as medication. So, in my case, people always laugh at this, but I learned kung fu. So it's called Shaolin monk boxing, believe it or not.
Okay.
And I learned kung fu. Bruce Lee's kind of famous for kung fu. His kung fu was Wing Chun. This is a different discipline. And but the thing was, Danny, it got me in a group of guys 2 days a week, and I had a trainer that held me accountable to being there, which was critical. It got me out of the house, so I'm not being introspective, sitting around thinking bad thoughts. And he worked us really, really hard. So, going for a walk and everything is great, but if you can do really vigorous exercise, so in my case, kung fu and cycling together, and that combined with, so I'm on Lovan, which, if anyone knows, SSRI, it's a form of medication. It's strong. I was put on a strong dose at first because things were very bad. Now I've weaned down to a fairly low dose. The instruction by doctor. One time I thought I was healed, and I took myself off completely, which I always say never do. And if you ever want to know how bad that was, just ask my wife; she'll tell you. It was catastrophic. It was just awful. And the other thing that helped was studying, reading, researching, and writing, because the book that I wrote, Hope, Help, and Healing for the Depressed, going through the process of evaluating how I got to that point of a total breakdown, and beginning to look at it in a more positive, analytical light rather than a self-damning light, was very, very therapeutic. And then, of course, last but not least, I remember sitting with my doctor, and he said, Mark, this was at the point when my new career had started and God had really blessed my new career. And he said, Mark, he said, most people who have as severe a breakdown as you do never recover. He said they might recover some, but they never go back to fully, functional lives. He said, for you to recover and now be successful in a highly technical vocation, he said, it's an absolute miracle. So behind the scenes, God's putting me, connecting me with the right people. We'll get to this in a minute, but even the open door that I got for this kind of crazy new career. You just see God's hand in all of that.
Do you find that I think some of it is I hope this doesn't, like with me, I understand that I think sometimes when you bring the Christian perspective, our Christian perspective to things, we always want a miracle. We want this affliction to be out of our lives. Do you think sometimes it does help to just come to a place where you accept it and say, this is something I have. This is something that's not going to go away. I need to deal with this on a long-term basis. I found that in my life that I've stopped trying to wish it away and just say, okay, this is something I've got. Now I can ignore it and let it catch up with me and take over, or I can try to do like what you're talking about, manage this. And there's different ways to manage it. And obviously the ones you just gave are great. But do you find that acceptance along the way does help? Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't remember the reference, but there's a verse in the Old Testament. One of the prophets said, "This is my burden, and I must bear it."
Yeah.
Just that short thought. And there are many times, to be just really open and frank with you, that I've been bitter. And God, why did you make me this way?
Right.
I've often wondered, what would my life be like if I were, quote, normal, right?
Right.
Now, in truth, a lot of people struggle. They may not struggle as I have, their whole adult life, but many people go through periods, at least, as you said, stress-induced, trauma-induced. I mean, the science says that there's actually a part of your brain that when it's exposed to prolonged stress and the chemicals that accompany that part of your brain enlarges. So there are actually physiological and therefore neurological changes that take place in your brain as a result of prolonged stress. I've unfortunately seen times, and I think ministry, because that's my background, I've seen ministers that have done crazy stuff, and I'm not excusing sin, don't think that, but all of a sudden they've run off with a secretary or, sadly taken their own life, all these just incredible things that have happened. And I have maybe a slightly different perspective on that, in that I think that in some cases they have gone through something like what I have gone through, and they have snapped and they've lost it. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
And I have people that I've known that have had physical conditions like, for example, thyroid conditions that then affect the hormones, that then affect the way you feel and think, and then medical mismanagement, bad advice. I mean, I've sat in church and people have said, just throw away your meds and trust the Lord. Well, yeah, can I do both? Can I trust the Lord and take medicine? I mean, I have high blood pressure, right? I take medication for that. I don't think that makes me a person with no faith or a bad person.
Right.
Just means I have a condition that needs to be treated.
Right.
So it's.
I think something you mentioned earlier. You were mentioning, and I lost my train of thought there, but I'll get it back. But I was going to pick up on it. You mentioned that. But what were you talking about? That was so interesting. So many things you said they're so good. But you were talking about how sometimes you have asked, Lord, why'd you make me so different? But in some cases too, it is these quote unquote, in air quotes, ailments that make you different in special ways as well. There is an empathy that comes to the table with this. There is an awareness of other people that might be suffering. So there are some positives, I guess. I'm always trying to find the positive.
There are some silver linings.
But I think a person that struggles with some of these things is more perceptive of life, absorbs life. And that's sometimes what is so painful is you absorb of everything of life in real colors. I mean, everything. Music
that's
affects
a very
you.
Perceptive
Art affects you. I mean, so these things affect you deeply. And many times when I want to get on myself about some of these ailments that I have as well, I remind myself, but they make you the special person you are. And when people
Mm,
think of Mark Tossell, as people think of a very special person, and that's the trade-off. Sometimes, you have these struggles, but so I think, in my opinion, I think you've come to a wonderful place, a place now where you've come out of that darkness. Not that it ever goes away completely. We'll struggle with managing that, but God has brought you to a productive place. Can you
mm,
tell our audience a little bit about what you're doing now, and kind of how this is a season of life where
yeah.
you're able to be productive again, and give to a level that you want to.
Yeah, it's interesting that you made a very good statement around not that it's left entirely. Um, so there's still a predisposition for melancholy, and I thought, some of the things I do, really on a daily basis to help deal with that. If you think of self-care, and I would say one thing that characterized my life before the breakdown was a complete lack of self-care. It was always about others. It's great to be unselfish, but it got to the point where I just let myself fall apart because of that. As far as as I'm in a place now, thankfully, where I'm productive, an important part of that, and it's a challenge, is noticing the warning signs that I might not be well, or I'm heading down a path of depression. So probably the biggest one for me is irritability. So if I notice at work or at home that I'm unusually irritable, that there's an unusually short fuse, that little things are setting me off, for me, that it would be the number one sign that, oh, okay, what's going on? The other one would be what my doctor calls ruminations. So, I'm an early morning person, so it's not unusual to wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock. And I've got to be careful if I'm lying in bed starting to think negative thoughts. Beating up self is a common one. Beating up self, just kind of looking over the past day or week and what you could have done better, and etc. Those are probably two of the big warning signs for me, is the ruminations and the irritability. And then ways of dealing with that: exercise is really important. I still see my doctor regularly. I force myself to see people when I don't want to, because the desire to self-isolate is a constant challenge, but it's actually the worst thing I can do, because I end up spiraling. But I don't want to see anyone. It's like exercise. Don't want to do it, but when I do it, I feel so much better.
Sure, I know. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
you're telling me. Yeah, this is all stuff that I'm very familiar with. But as I mentioned to
before I forget,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah.
No, sorry, before I forget, something really cool that I've only been doing for a short while, but it's actually really helping. A friend put me onto it. I don't know if you've ever heard of neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is where the brain is, it's kind of, I don't want to use the word programmable really, but it's flexible. It can be molded and shaped.
Sure. Right.
You
Yeah.
can train it in new ways of behavior and thought.
Yeah. Well,
right?
like you were mentioning earlier, that it's proven, it is proven that when we go through trauma, or we struggle with long seasons of depression, our brain actually is rewired. This is documented. Our brain is actually rewired, but like what you're talking about, we can actually rewire it the other way with positive affirmations. What the scripture talks about, meditation, choosing our meditations, we can actually reprogram it to a better place.
So I have this thing, I call it my brain hack. I think some people call it a neuroplasticity journal, but every night an alarm goes off at my phone at 9:30, and I have a piece of paper next to my bed. So I'm often in bed early, go to bed early, wake up early. But even if I'm not, I'll go get that pen and paper. And what I have to do is think of 3 things and write them down of what went well that day, or what I did well that day. And it could be the smallest thing. And I write those down, those 3 things. I don't have to ever look at them again. It sounds so silly. Takes a minute.
Yeah.
But every night, and that's the key, doing that every night, and you're programming your brain to look for the negative and not, I'm sorry, of course, the positive
Right.
and not the negative.
Right.
Because I'm so predisposed to look for where I failed and what I did wrong. And as many of us are. And I have found that's helpful. With my story of where I am now. So I'll give you the short version. It's a really crazy story, but after I resigned from the church because I just had medical advice that the emotional load of being a pastor was just killing me. After the breakdown, after the break, I went back to ministry and I started going downhill again. So I wrote a book on depression, did a book tour, came back, couldn't get a job. So I have an engineering degree, but I hadn't been an engineer for 20 years. So I literally couldn't get any job, not even the lowest paying kind of simple job. And I got really discouraged. And then a friend from church, they needed a platform, a computer platform, implemented, configured, customized, and set up, and for their wealth management or financial planning business. I'd never heard of this platform, but they knew I had a mathematics background, and so in a moment of madness, they offered me this job with a platform I'd never even heard of, never touched, never seen. And in a moment of madness, I accepted it. Did not know what I was getting into. It's just an incredibly complex task, project. If you knew the platform and if you knew the business, it's quite complex. But if you don't understand financial planning, which I had no understanding, and you don't know the platform, it's extremely challenging. I'd go to work at 6 a.m. in the morning, literally arrive at 6, spend 2 or 3 hours learning the platform, and then work from like 9 to 5 trying to do the work. So every day was learn, do, learn, do, learn, do. And thankfully, that was actually very good for my mental state, to learn something new. And thankfully, I became quite good at it, and that helped my mental state, my feeling of self-worth. I'm not a complete loser. I'm not a total failure. I am good at something. And
it helped the midlife crisis come to an end.
Yeah, and even from the perspective, one of the biggest causes of stress in our lives were just finances for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
And for me to move into a good job, making good money so quickly, without you say you could have been an engineer, but 20 years of not being an engineer, you can't walk into an engineer's job with no experience. Was extraordinary. That's wonderful. So got involved in the space that I'm in now, which I really enjoy, which is, for anyone who knows this area, data, analytics, a little bit of artificial intelligence and machine learning, but for me, it's good because it's a mix of client facing and technology, because I do need that social interaction, but I also love the technology. It's funny, I get to present a lot. So drawing on my background of ministry, presenting, speaking, being in those conversations where you're in some cases persuading people in a good way that this product will help them. And now, amazingly, I never expected this. We started a business 3 years ago, and I'm one of the partners and owners of the business. It's first 18 months are really tough. Starting a business, it's never easy, but thankfully, particularly the last 12 months, have been really good. Things are picking up.
That's so good. That's so
I've got to travel to America and speak. This is crazy. I flew to San Francisco. It was really funny, Danny. After all I've gone through, I got flown to San Francisco. Salesforce, this huge cloud computer company, they put me up in this crazy expensive 5-star hotel that I think it's called the Fairmont at San Francisco. You should look it up. Okay. It's just ridiculous, this place. All paid for, speaking to these groups about this platform that I work with, and also sharing my story as well, by the way, on a personal note. I look back and
honestly, what you're saying right there is exactly, as I mentioned, trying to get folks that are new to the podcast or watching understand this is exactly what we want to do, is through testimonies like this, through teaching, help people that are maybe in a dark place know, hey, those tears are temporary. With God's help, you can move out of that and get back to a place where you're like you mentioned, sharing your story. And maybe there was somebody in that conference room or in that setting, in that ballroom, that's listening to your story that, that is resonating, and they're in that same dark place that you were. And so they're getting hope from the well that was filled by
I'll
your
give you
tears. Yeah.
I'll give you an amazing example. This is crazy, right? So there's a big conference, 10,000 people or so before COVID, obviously. 10,000 people attended. So very large conference held at Darling Harbour in the ICC, the convention center. And I spoke on the subject of analytics and data. And there's a guy sitting on the front row, and I noticed he didn't really appear to be listening. He was in his phone, and thought, he's probably busy, And I finished speaking, and as soon as I got off, he said, "Can we talk? Can we talk?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "What have I said?" We go to the side. He said, "You will not believe this." He said, "But," he said, "I've only been in this technology ecosystem for 2 days." He said, "I was a pastor." He said, "I had a breakdown." He said, "I was unemployed." He said, "And a Christian friend of mine employed me to work with this platform, Salesforce." No joke.
That's crazy.
Better, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, I came to this conference thinking, they call it the imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
What am I doing here? I have no idea what I'm doing. This is crazy.
Sure.
And I sat in your lecture. He said, nothing you said made sense because I don't understand the technology. He said, but when you stood up and they showed your name, he said, you talked about that golden jacket that you won. So he said, I looked you up and I came to an interview that you had with Salesforce about your story.
Wow.
And he said, while you were talking about this data stuff that I don't understand, he said, I'm reading your story.
Oh.
And he said, I got tears coming down my eyes saying, this is me, this is
Yeah.
me.
Praise the Lord.
And
That's awesome, man.
he said, well, if you can do it, he said, I can do it. And I'll be honest with you, Danny, of all the accolades and achievements and blessings, being able to help him, I'm still in touch with him today. He works with another business that we partner with. He's a lovely guy. It's gold,
That's
if you
great.
know that you've inspired, encouraged someone.
Great. And that's what I hope comes about from this. I really do. I really do hope that maybe somebody watching this, first of all, gets your book and reads through that and really kind of comprehends what you went through, and then somehow reaches out to you and lets you know that you've been inspired. So Mark, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you or wanted to learn more about your story, any place like we could direct them, or any
Yeah. So I have a blog, and some of the posts are technical, but some of them are around the journey. And there's also a free ebook on there. So that's marktossell.com.
marktossell.com. And then
MarkTossell. So MarkTossell.com.
And I'll try to put a link with that here.
And then my book's available on Amazon. Only as a Kindle at the moment. It ran out of print, but if you just search for my name, Mark Tossell, on Amazon, and the name of the book is Hope, Help and Healing for the Depressed. If people want to reach out to me, I'm always happy to chat with people. Probably the best way, if people are using LinkedIn, they can find me on LinkedIn. Obviously, my last name is quite uncommon, so they can reach out that way. Other than that, they could message me through Facebook. I'm a little slow to add friends on Facebook because I've had a lot of requests and stuff. But I believe they can message me if they're not a friend, and then I can accept it or not. But generally, again, those who are in LinkedIn, the professional kind of social media, I'm very active on there. I'm also on Twitter. Again, my name @Mark Tossell. And, or even if you want to put my email in the, well, not a public link, but if you're emailing anyone or if they reach out to you, you can give them my email.
All right. And any parting words to any parting shots you want to give to maybe somebody who's listening and is in a just maybe a thought or two, just some parting words you'd like to tell them?
There's probably two things. Number one, a real struggle for me is often I'll go to take my pill each day, Lovan, and I'll get this feeling of, gee, I wish I was stronger. Why am I'm so weak? Or in a Christian context, often I'm just such a bad Christian. If I was a better Christian, I wouldn't feel like this. I would just encourage people that there's a lot more people than you know that go through this. Some like me, their whole lives, some for certain seasons and periods. Some of the most gifted, brilliant composers, authors, artists, politicians, leaders, speakers. I compiled a list a while ago. I'll have to dig it out. It's incredible. Those that went through it. I remember reading that and thinking, well, in one sense, I'm in good company. So just realize a lot of people go through that. We're all unique, and it's okay to not be okay, right? It's not, you wouldn't beat yourself up for, having diabetes or having a blood condition or breaking a leg and having to use a crutch for 12 weeks. So don't beat yourself up. Don't give into that. And then, secondly, I would say at the top of the list of things to do if you're in a dark place, it's hard to do, but I would just urge people and exhort them and even beg them to do it. And that is just talk to someone. It has to be someone that you trust. And in some cases, that's why I like talking to a professional, because I can tell them anything. I told my psychologist things, and I was 40 something, 6 or 7, I think. I told him things I'd never told anyone in my whole life, because I thought, you know what, we've got this relationship where it's patient, patient doctor privilege.
Yeah, sure.
I can tell him anything, and I can't tell you the relief there was in telling him these things, and just to get that conversation going.
Sure.
And if there's someone out there that they think, I don't know anyone I can talk to that would understand. I've had many people reach out to me over the years and say, you don't know me, but I think you would understand what I'm going through. And I'm happy to have a conversation with people.
That's great.
It might be at a strange time of day if you're in America, because on the other side of the world.
It might.
But, yeah.
Well, to wrap things up here,
Danny, I've really enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed this, Mark, and I just want to say, hearing your story, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for not doing something that, as your wife said, many people would have regretted. You're a special man. You're a good man, and you always bring a smile to my face when I think of you. And I learned a lot today, and I know for a fact so many people that are listening will be encouraged, and I'm hoping that somebody will reach out to you and make that plain. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to Tears to Wells. I think today you heard just a fascinating, incredible story of how someone took the tears of mental health issues, a dark place, and has turned them around and using that today to do the best to try to help others heal from their hurts and hang-ups. And so I want to thank again Mark Tossell from Sydney, Australia, for being with us today. And hopefully we'll see you again next week. Make sure, if this video is a blessing to you, make sure to like it. And if you know somebody who's struggling with depression and some of the fallout of it, why don't you do them a great favor and share this with them by way of message. Thank you. God bless you. We'll see you back here next Thursday right at noon. God bless you.
Thank you.
Oh, man.